If you clicked on this video, you're probably familiar with Azkaban's most famous prisoners and its terrifying guards, but have you ever wondered how Azkaban came to be? To understand that, we have to look at its origins, its history, and the system that kept it running. The island before Azkaban. Before Azkaban existed, there was only a remote island in the North Sea. Sailors avoided it, sensing dread even when they couldn't see land, the result of dark magic permeating the area. During the Middle Ages, a dark wizard known as Echrisdus claimed the island. Very little is known about him, but what survives in ministry records suggests that he was a wizard of extreme cruelty and advanced magical ability. Echrisdus used the Fidelius charm to hide the island completely and built a fortress there, not as a home or a stronghold, but as a place designed for suffering. He lured Muggle sailors to the island using magical illusions and imprisoned them inside the fortress. What happened to them was so horrific that later ministry investigators deliberately avoided recording details. What mattered most was the result. Years of torture, fear, and despair saturated the fortress so deeply that it drew Dementors to it naturally. When Echrisdus eventually died, the magic concealing the island collapsed. The Ministry of Magic discovered the fortress and sent Aurors to investigate. Inside, they found the remains of countless victims, and Dementors already nesting within the walls, feeding on the emotional residue left behind. At that moment, the Ministry had a choice: destroy the fortress and deal with the Dementors later, or keep what already existed and turn it into something useful. They chose the latter. The creation of Azkaban. By the early 1700s, the wizarding world needed a permanent solution for serious magical criminals. Local prisons existed, but they were inconsistent, insecure, and often overwhelmed. When the ministry rediscovered the abandoned fortress built by the dark wizard Echrisdus, it presented an uncomfortable opportunity. The fortress was already hidden, already isolated, and already saturated with dark magic. More importantly, it was already inhabited by Dementors, creatures the ministry could neither destroy nor control by force. In 1718, Minister for Magic Damocles Roll chose not to dismantle the structure. Instead, he ordered it repurposed. A deal was made with the Dementors. They would remain on the island and guard the prison in exchange for being allowed to feed on the despair of the inmates. With that agreement, the fortress officially became Azkaban. From the ministry's perspective, the arrangement was efficient. Dementors required no payment, no rest, and no training. They could sense escape attempts instantly, and their presence alone was enough to deter rebellion. Azkaban quickly gained a reputation as a place from which no one returned unchanged. Not everyone supported the decision. Between 1733 and 1747, Minister Eldritch Diggory visited Azkaban and was disturbed by what he found. Prisoners were not simply contained, they were mentally destroyed. Many had lost the ability to speak or remember their crimes. The prison even maintained a graveyard for inmates who died from despair alone. Diggory attempted to begin reforms and explored the possibility of limiting the Dementors' influence. He died of dragonpox before any changes could be implemented. His successor, Hephaestus Gore, abandoned reform entirely and strengthened the prison instead. From that point forward, Azkaban's role was no longer questioned. It worked, it inspired fear, and for the ministry, that was enough. Dementors as guards. Dementors were officially described as mindless creatures that fed only on emotion, but their behavior at Azkaban complicates that idea. They followed orders. They guarded cells instead of killing indiscriminately. They even accepted a deal with the ministry, food in exchange for obedience. Whatever Dementors are, they understand systems and they understand leverage. This made them ideal guards. They did not need to be paid, trained, or disciplined. Their presence alone was enough to prevent rebellion, and their ability to sense emotion made escape nearly impossible. For the ministry, the arrangement was efficient and final. That efficiency shaped every aspect of life inside Azkaban, and none of it was humane. Life inside Azkaban. Azkaban was never designed to rehabilitate prisoners. From the moment it opened, its purpose was containment through despair. Prisoners were held in cold stone cells with little light and almost no human interaction. Their wands were confiscated immediately, and they were cut off from any form of comfort or stimulation. Food was basic, sleep was irregular, and time quickly lost meaning. But the physical conditions were not what broke people. The Dementors did. Dementors patrolled the corridors constantly, draining prisoners of positive emotion and forcing them to relive their worst memories over and over again. Over time, inmates lost the ability to feel hope, joy, or even anger. Many forgot their names. Some stopped speaking entirely. Others screamed until they no longer had the strength to do even that. There was even a graveyard on the island outside the wall of Azkaban where Dementors buried prisoners who had died, which was a common occurrence. For nearly 300 years, there were no recorded escapes. This reputation made Azkaban feared even among the most powerful dark wizards. Being sent there was widely understood as a slow erasure rather than a sentence with an end. The first known escape. For centuries, Azkaban's reputation as an inescapable prison went unchallenged. No mass breakouts, no daring rescues, no cracks in the walls. But the first real failure of the system did not come from force or rebellion. It came from bureaucracy, grief, and a father who refused to accept the sentence his son had been given. In 1982, Barty Crouch Jr. was secretly removed from Azkaban by his father, Barty Crouch Sr., who at the time was a powerful and highly respected ministry official. Crouch Sr. used Polyjuice Potion to swap his imprisoned son with his terminally ill wife, disguising her as Barty Jr., allowing the real prisoner to leave the island undetected. Within days, Mrs. Crouch died inside the prison, and her death was recorded as that of her son. The ministry never discovered the truth, and Azkaban's records remained unchanged. What makes this incident especially revealing is how little resistance the prison itself offered. The Dementors detected no escape attempt, no sudden surge of hope, fear, or defiance. The deception worked precisely because it was quiet. There was no emotional spike to alert the guards, no dramatic break in routine. Barty Crouch Jr. left Azkaban not because the prison was breached, but because its systems were never designed to catch something like this. The incident exposed a fundamental flaw in Azkaban's design. The Dementors were effective at suppressing emotion and crushing resistance, but they were blind to calculated, methodical deception. Sirius Black, the first true escape. In 1993, Sirius Black became the first person to escape Azkaban unaided. Pushed to the edge of madness, Sirius held onto his sanity by clinging to the knowledge of his innocence. He later described it as more of an obsession than a happy thought. Something the Dementors couldn't feed on, but strong enough to keep his sense of self intact and eventually give him the strength to transform into his animagus form inside his cell. In animal form, his emotions were simpler and less detectable to Dementors. His thinner body allowed him to slip through the bars of his cell. After escaping the fortress, Sirius swam across the freezing North Sea to the mainland, a journey that would have killed most prisoners. Sirius Black's escape did not immediately lead to reform, but it quietly shattered the illusion that Azkaban was the perfect solution. For the first time, the Ministry was forced to admit that the Dementor-based security were not an absolute solution. They could be confused, they could be bypassed, and they could fail to notice a prisoner who did not behave the way they expected. Still, no meaningful changes were made. Azkaban continued operating exactly as it always had, relying on the same creatures and the same methods. The Ministry chose to treat Sirius's escape as an anomaly rather than a warning. The fall of Azkaban. When Voldemort returned in the mid-1990s, the Dementors did not hesitate. They abandoned the Ministry and joined him willingly. Voldemort offered them greater freedom and an endless supply of victims, and the Dementors accepted without resistance. This moment exposed something the Ministry had long refused to acknowledge. Dementors were capable of choosing sides. They understood power, reward, and opportunity. The creatures trusted to guard the wizarding world's most dangerous prison were not loyal. They were merely fed. As the Dementors deserted Azkaban, the prison's security began to collapse from within. By 1997, Azkaban was no longer secure. With the Dementors gone, the fortress relied on magical protections that had always been secondary. Death Eaters were freed in a mass breakout during the Second Wizarding War, an event the Ministry attempted to minimize publicly. For the first time since its creation, Azkaban was exposed as what it truly was, a prison that had relied almost entirely on fear rather than control. After the war. Following Voldemort's final defeat in 1998, the Ministry was forced to confront the system it had relied on for centuries. The war had exposed just how dangerous that system really was. Dementors had defected en masse, sided openly with Voldemort, and turned Azkaban from a prison into a liability. Under the leadership of Kingsley Shacklebolt, one of the Ministry's first major reforms was the permanent removal of Dementors from Azkaban. This marked a historic shift. For the first time since the prison's creation, Azkaban was no longer guarded by creatures that fed on despair. Aurors were installed as guards instead, and the prison was placed under direct Ministry oversight rather than being left to function as a semi-autonomous dumping ground for criminals. The change was symbolic as much as practical. Azkaban was no longer meant to break people before they ever stood trial. The removal of Dementors also raised uncomfortable questions about justice. For generations, prisoners had been subjected to psychological torture regardless of their crimes, mental state, or even guilt. Wrongful convictions like Sirius Black's had been effectively death sentences in slow motion. The post-war ministry did not erase that history, but it did acknowledge it by fundamentally altering how the prison operated. Azkaban still exists, but its role has changed. It is no longer designed to erase identity or crush the will to live. It functions as a containment facility rather than a weapon, a place meant to hold dangerous individuals securely, not punish them endlessly before trial or rehabilitation is even possible. Whether that change came too late for those already lost to the prison is another matter entirely.